Okay, we are live. Very exciting. And cool. So we fought through all kinds of exciting challenges already. You were joined onto the call at least 3 times, which is neat. So today we have Javier C. Nelson. I'm saying C because I'll mispronounce your name probably. Calvera?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. So Javier Calvera Nelson, and he is speaking on MVC testing, which is cool. That is a feature in ASP.NET Core 2.1. So that's neat. I'm going to start with the community links for the week. We have a few. So let me get those lined up over here, and I will share my screen. And awesome. Okay, going to the live broadcast. My screen is live. I've learned to test that out, which is neat. So today, yes, first of all, we have the ASP.NET Core 2.1 RC1 release announcement. So that is cool. This post talks about the what you need to do to upgrade and all that. So and updates for tools. So good stuff. We also have Scott Hanselman's big post where he kind of talks through everything. Excuse me. Shows the what's in it, how to get it set up, and overviews some of the stuff also for .NET Core 3.0, which is pretty exciting. So I'm not sure. Maybe we'll have a maybe we'll cover that as well coming up. But yeah, so that is a cool post. The videos for sorry, Build 2018 are up. So I had the best luck. If you search for .NET or for ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core, you won't see some of them. So I actually had the best luck just going in and getting the .NET Core. If you sort by top rated, ASP.NET Core comes right to the top anyways because it's awesome. So here's some of the top overview sessions. We have the Hanselman and Hunter's overview and roadmap. We have the What's New in ASP.NET Core 2.1 overview from Dan Roth. And we have the Signal R overview from Davian Fowlards. So a lot of good stuff. So there is that. This is pretty cool. So this is an update for Cash Cow to work with .NET Standard and ASP.NET Core MVC. This is one we had covered in a while ago before it came into ASP.NET Core. So this is cool to get that that support. So we've already had some questions in the chat if we had some Blazor stuff. Yes, we got a few. So Lohith has a Blazor Hacker News clone. So this is kind of neat. This is an example creating a Hacker News client, going through getting all the data and everything from Hacker News, and source code available on GitHub. Also interesting on Blazor. This is just something I've been keeping an eye on. This is Cloud Crate. This is so when you are working on the client, you need you need to store data on the client, and you can store it directly in session storage. This is kind of a nice library that is storing against that storage, and has kind of a wrapper over it, so you can set values, retrieve values, and it's pulling those, saving them in session storage. It's a nice C# wrapper on top, so that is cool. I will confess, I found this because I've been watching the Blazor teams, kind of what they're contributing to and what they're working on. And I saw Steve Sanderson had contributed to this, so figuring some interesting things going on there. Nate McMaster. So we've talked before about global tools. And so Nate has updated some things on .NET Core 2.1 and how global tools are working there. I need to lock on. So this is frustrating because I am locked on me, and this stupid Okay. All right. I am locked on me again. Let's see if it sticks this time. So .NET Core 2.1 global tools. So these are updates for the 2.1 release. So it's exciting. It's a lot easier. It's more built in. And then as far as actually creating and troubleshooting, et cetera, working with common errors and workarounds, et cetera, Nate has you covered there. Good stuff. Damien Bowden. So he is showing uploading and sending image messages with ASP.NET Core SignalR. So this is the new SignalR, and uploading images and sending them from the client using a base 64 string in Angular. So nice kind of overview showing how to do this, and this is updated for ASP.NET Core 2.1. So that is cool stuff. All right. So there's been two projects that have a very similar name. One, it was ASP.NET Core Boilerplate, or excuse me, ASP.NET MVC Boilerplate. So this has been recently renamed to .NET Boxed. And along with that, Mohammed Rohan Saeed has included some cool stuff for GraphQL. So we've had some recent posts on getting GraphQL set up, how to work with it. This is really nice because it's a template that's got it included. So there's a GraphQL server built in. So a lot of good stuff in this. This is definitely something where, as a boilerplate, is something where you can go through and create a new project that has a lot of cool things that you can include just in checkboxes. You'll see all the cool stickers here, for things like Serilog and GraphQL and NW or NWebSec, et cetera. Those are all kind of included there. So very cool. And so again, one of the top announcements here is the name update. So .NET Boxed. So Nate has updated the ASP.NET Core book. I know we've talked about this several times, but this is a big update where he's revised it. So this is exciting. This is an update for the book, and then working on ASP.NET Core 2.1 updates as well. So this is a free book, great way to learn what's new in ASP.NET Core. And finally, Steve Gordon. And Steve Gordon is digging into dependency injection. And here he's talking about registering implementations using delegates. So this is a great post from him, and continuing on his series in dependency injection. And so I'm kind of rushing through these today because I cannot wait to see what you've got to show us, Javier. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. So cool. So Javier's here, and you're going to be showing us MVC functional testing. So yes. Can you first kind of describe what that is?
Yeah. So essentially, if you're a developer, you usually like to write tests for your app, mostly because it's a way of building quality, and because that allows you to determine or detect when you break your app, when you do a change, or have confidence that you haven't broken your app when you make changes. So we have ways of doing unit testing for controllers, page models, and things like that. Oh, I'm completely mute. Is that? Oh, no. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, yeah. I didn't know for a second if I was mute. Anyway, so going back to what we were talking about, you can write unit tests for pages, you can write unit tests for controllers and things like that. But there are things that are hard to test by its own nature. For example, how do you test routing? How do you test authorization? Things like that. So essentially what people has been doing so far in many cases has been to just doing plain old integration tests. You deploy your app to a server, you stand it up, and then you send HTTP requests to test the app, or use Selenium to test the UI. So while that works, it's kind of like a big barrier to go right there. So in the MVC team, we use a feature. We built our own infrastructure to test SPNet core applications in memory. So what we do essentially is we boot up your app, we initialize your app in memory, and then we give you an HTTP client instance that you can use to talk to your app. So that way, you don't have to deal with deploying your app or like standing it up, setting it down, turning it down, and all those type of things. And what that allows you is to essentially validate every aspect of your app except for like the pure network communication or the pure browser specific details.
Okay, so this is plugging at at kind of a nice midpoint where you're not dealing with all the things of like Selenium and setting up all the HTTP requesting and all that stuff, which you don't really need to test and can be slower and can be kind of finicky, but you are testing at a higher level than just calling into specific functions and saying, if I call this function, give me this. So you're able to test out you're able to say, if I called this URL, I would get back this result.
Exactly. And the important thing is that this enables you to easily test things that cannot be tested in isolation. And a clear example of that is routing. You can test a route in your application, and you might think that like your routing works, but well, we have Dan here.
Great, Dan.
But when you are testing, but you might have another action that has a controller with it, that has a route that has higher precedence or something like that. And that's not something that you're going to be able to catch in a unit test, but that you will be able to catch in an integration test or in a functional test. The reason being that when you send a message to the application, both routes are going to be on, and you're gonna see a different result than the one that you hope or that you expected in your unit test. So it's going to allow you to test things that depend on your whole app being on.
Okay. So we have some fun here. Well, you guys are having to scramble around because we had Chrome kept crashing on your machine.
Yes.
So I'm going to tell dad jokes while you guys get this all kind of hooked up, because you're switching over to your other laptop at this point.
I'm switching to my other laptop, so I'm going to be doing the demo from here.
Okay. And then you can screen share over so you'll screen share from that machine, and I think we're ready to present from that. And I will see me.
Okay.
That's infinity.
This is awesome.
Okay. So I think it's going. I have another, my other browser is locking up, but I think it is good. It's trying to show me an ad. Okay, so I think everyone can see you. I'm just verifying. Video will play after ad. Yeah, let's just go. I'm sure we're good.
Okay, awesome. So I'm just gonna put my demo scripts here, because the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna write a bunch of like .NET CLI commands to create a project. So essentially what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a solution. I'm gonna create a web app using Razor and individual and identity. And then I'm gonna create a test project, and I'm gonna set it up so that we can write a simple test that just goes to the home page and just asserts that like we are getting back HTML essentially. So with that, if you can see my screen, can you confirm that? Awesome.
I can. It would be good. I don't know if it's easy in that PowerShell on the right. Can you bump up the font size a little bit?
Yeah. The font. Awesome. I'm gonna rush through this because it's not interesting. It's just it's easier to set up things this way. So I'm just gonna create a solution. I'm gonna create a Razor app with individual user accounts. And you can probably not see the entire screen, but that doesn't really matter that much. Just bear with me for a second. Source. So this is application. So this is off. Okay, give me a second. Yeah. So that's creating our Razor app.
So that's the same thing if you did like file new project, select auth, and said you want individual user accounts. That would give you the same result.
Yes, it's just that like it's technically easier to do it from the command line.
Okay.
I'm gonna copy paste these things because it will be faster. Okay, so I'm gonna add it to the solution. Then I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna create an XUnit project called Sample Application Functional Test, and I'm gonna put it under a test folder.
Okay, so far we have a new solution, we have a project with individual user accounts, and then we have an XUnit test that we've added, and now you're adding in some functional tests as well.
Yes, so I added the XUnit project, and I added it to the solution, and now I'm gonna add a reference from the functional project test project to the app. Okay, and this is all the stuff that you can do with the CLI, which is something that makes me really happy. Okay, so we should have everything ready. So now I'm just gonna go and open code.
And that thing you did, code dot, is some people don't know about this. That dot represents the current directory. So you're telling Visual Studio Code to start up and passing it the folder name of the current directory.
Exactly. So that will open my solution here. So we can do .NET Restore real quick here just to make sure that everything is right. Then what we're going to do next while this is restoring is we're going to go to the app, and we're going to do a couple of changes that we need to do to enable the functional tests in the test project. So the first one is we need to reference the Web SDK, and then we need to reference Microsoft SPNet Core app. And this is going to be my...
So while you're typing that, question for you. It's great that you can do all that you just did there from the command line and using CLI instructions. Will it at some point, or is there an easy way to do this from Visual Studio? Like if I'm in Visual Studio and I want to add functional testing to my app.
So what you would do is you would already have, so I'm starting here from scratch. I don't want to think that like you need to do all these steps. I only did like the 7 first step because I was starting from like an empty solution. But typically you will have your own app and all that stuff. So you will already have like, hey, I went through the new project dialog and I created my app. And then you would hit like go add project, add function, add unit test project, and you will add your unit test project, and then you will add the reference from the unit test project to your app.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. So the CSProc part is something that changing this to the Web SDK is something that you will have to edit by hand most likely. But in the future, we plan to give you a template that will have this set up for you essentially, so that you don't have to go into your CSProc and do stuff. So with that, the other thing that we need to do is we need to reference Microsoft SPNet Core mvc.testing, and this is version 2.10 RC1 final.
It's worth mentioning, like you don't have to specify the version on ASP.NET-Core.app. I don't know if you guys already talked about that, but the version of the .app package is actually inferred from the Web SDK. So that's why you don't need the version on that one. It'll just automatically align itself. Just convenient.
Awesome. So since that restore went through, then what we are going to do is I'm just going to copy a snippet that I have here for the test, and I'm going to explain what this basic test does. Okay, so copy, and I'm going to go here and change this for like basic test. And I'm just gonna remove this class and switch it. Okay, so I'll be missing a bunch of usings. Let me just add that real quick. Seems like VS Code was giving me now the IntelliSense.
Yeah, needed to warm up a bit.
Yeah, I
woke up in the morning, like,
typed,
oh, you want IntelliSense? 1 second.
I typed it fast. It's my undoing. Okay, and this is systemnet HTTP. Okay, so now we should be good. So I'm gonna explain to you guys what we have done. So we're using XUnit for writing our functional test, but you can use any other testing framework of your choice. We are making use of class fixtures, which is a feature on XUnit that creates an app or creates a set of data for all that is shared among all the tests in that class. So the first thing to notice is this web application factory. So this is the type that we use to essentially allow you to create or to instantiate your app in memory. And we ask you to give us your program name or like your entry point. And in that entry point, we are going to be looking for a specific method named create web host builder, which is here, that has this exact signature. So if you are upgrading from 2.0 to 2.1, you will have a very similar method called build web host. You just need to change it to be create web host builder and call build in your main method. And that will enable us to essentially bootstrap your app in the same way that it gets bootstrapped when you run your app with F5.
If there's some sort of, and you're probably just about to say the answer to what I'm asking, but if there's something special I need to do when I'm starting it up under the web application factory, like say, for instance, I don't want to load some initialization data or I want to have some different config, is there any way that I can say, hey, I'm running under functional test mode, do something different?
Yes, so we don't have a specific guidance on how to do that yet, but I plan to put something out. The idea is that this is a starting point for you to be able to just like create an app and write a functional test and have it work. But when you are doing functional tests that you want to run on the CI and things like that, you will have to do things like mocking your dependencies and things like that. And we'll see that in a demo that I have later. So the idea would be, for example, for seeding data and things like that, you can do two things. You can either mock your database so that your seed data gets populated into your test database, for example, or you can just use any of the other extensibility points to use a different startup or to change your startup to have a section dedicated to functional tests. I will be providing more details on that later on, maybe sometime this month if people is interested in. So going back to what we were doing, we essentially created a class with use iClass fixture, and we set this web application factory of the program. So
somebody had asked if you can collapse the console window at the bottom of VS Code. Yep.
Oh, perfect. So then the next thing that we need to do is we need to declare a constructor in our test class, and we just need to pass in this web application factory as a parameter. XUnit will take care of initializing the class and passing it to you. So the only thing that we do is we set it on a property, and then we are ready to write our functional test. So what we're going to do is in our functional test, we're just going to create a client. We're going to send an HTTP request message to the index page, and we're just going to assert that we're getting back some HTML. We are not going to get into the content, but I will show you an example later that deals with the content. Okay?
Yep.
So if we run our test, and I want to run it from here, I cannot see where my testing is this? Yeah.
That looks like.
Yeah, my test explorer, because this is a super neat plugin that I discovered watching Scott Hanselman's.
That's not a Visual Studio Code upgrade. That's just a plugin that added that
exactly.
The test explorer. Oh, that's nice.
Is there what is the name of that?
.NET Test Explorer or something like that.
Okay.
I cannot remember the plugin, but like when I saw Scott Hanselman doing this, I was like, oh, this is pretty neat. Okay, so
yeah,
it's discovering the test. My machine is a bit slow sometimes. But yeah, so essentially we got our green test, and hopefully it will be here green too. If not, we'll just run it again. We'll just run it again because like we want to see that sweet green. So while this is running, what we can do next is to see how we can test some things that are kind of like harder to test in a unit test. So for example, let's do routing test. Okay, a very basic test that you can do to like sanity check the health of your app is just to like hit the endpoints and see what they get back, and that can tell you whether like you don't have like the right route, or like the route is not expecting the right thing and stuff like that.
So you're not getting like 404s or
exactly
or 500 server error things for stuff that should be valid requests.
Okay.
So for that, we are going to do we're just gonna go and do /. We're gonna do I'm just putting routes that essentially map to pages in here.
It's green.
Yes,
it's green.
I saw it. I think everyone
it's very
saw
important. There was some drama there for a second, but it did go green.
No, it's only my machine that is not super fast. Okay, so
actually, we have to see the plugin. Like, click on their extensions thing. We should see who did that. Give them some props. Like, yeah, that thing.
Yeah,
it should appear here. Yeah, .NET Test Explorer. Jun Han.
Yep, I shared it in the chat. Yeah, so if you go to code.visualstudio.com and click on the extensions and search for .NET Core Test Explorer, you'll find it.
Very nice.
Awesome. So going back to what we were doing is we are just setting some pages that we have on the sample to just like hit them and see that they return. Okay, so we're going to do about, we're going to do contact, and we are going to do privacy. So now the next thing we need to do is we need to pass in this URL parameter here. And we just need to like pass in it here. Okay. So we're going to name this test my endpoints. So this will work very well for get pages, and we actually use this infrastructure in the identity repo, and we have some tests that are like this. It's like, can I access this endpoint? So this will essentially give you an idea of like if you have wrong routes or if there are routes conflicting and things like that. So this is gonna run and everything passed. Perfect.
Nice.
The next thing we probably want to see is some authorization, because this is also a really good way of just testing that you have secured all the endpoints that you carry in your app. So what we can do is I'm just going to go ahead and copy it from my demo script because I'm tempting log to match. And I'm just going to copy this snippet and paste it into our test class. So I'm going to walk you through what this does. So essentially what we are doing is we are sending a request to a protected endpoint. In this case is the manage page on the identity UI. And we want to make sure that we get back a redirect, essentially pointing to the login page.
So that's the page like where you go manage your user profile settings. Like it should only be accessible by that current user, not by
an anonymous user in this case.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I'm going to explain you how this create client works. So the factory essentially gives you a bunch of methods. Let me show you to create clients. So we have create client that has an overload without parameters, and we have create client that like has this overload that takes web application factory client options, and we have create default client. So normally you would use create client, and create client gives you gives you an HTTP client that does a couple of things for you. It follows redirects automatically, and it handles cookies automatically. If for some reason you have a one-off test in which you are interested in actually seeing a redirect or doing something more specific, you can either use create client and pass in some options like the base address to use, whether to handle cookies, how many redirections are allowed, and whether you want to like redirect or not. Or if you need full control of your client, you can just call create default client, and this will give you an untainted client. It will not have any handler. It will not have any specific behavior. So you can essentially configure anything you want in here. So if you need to add an extra middleware or something like that, you can really easily plug in whatever logic you need to. So what we are doing in this case is we are using this create client method, and we are passing the options to essentially say, hey, this is my base URL, and I want you to not follow redirects automatically. So that way we can see the specific redirects. So after that, we use our client to talk to go and try and access the managed endpoint. And given the fact that it's a protected endpoint, we should expect to have a redirect, and we should expect to have a redirect to the account login page. Okay, so if we run this test, I want to do it through the test discovery thing. Apparently, I need to rediscover something like that. I don't really know how it refresh. I didn't see that refresh. So what is happening right now? What is going to happen right now is that we're going to see that endpoint being hit, and we are going to see that like we have login. The other thing that you can do, which we also do in identity, is the complete opposite. Make sure that when you have an authenticated user, you can access authenticated endpoints. So while that is running, oh, it already ran, perfect. So yeah, your test worked. We are going to go to a more complete sample, which is the one that I was mentioning before. We are going to show you, I'm going to switch to Visual Studio for this, is we have the same application here that we just built, but it has a couple of extra things. So we've built a page that essentially goes to your GitHub profile. Well, we've built a page that shows you a text box to introduce your GitHub username, or like any GitHub username, and then it talks to the GitHub API and retrieves the details. Okay, so I'm just gonna show you real quick the functionality provided by machine.
This is just accessing stuff that's available publicly anonymously from the GitHub API, right? There's no
This is just literally going to api.github.com.
Cool.
So IIS is playing tricks on me. Okay.
There it goes.
Here we are. So we have our GitHub profile, and we can say Dan Roth 27, because like he was kind enough to lend me his laptop. So
the 27th Dan Roth. Yeah,
exactly.
That's me. I do work at Microsoft still.
Yeah.
Knock on wood.
Okay. Still.
According to sample application.
Yes. So let me show you a bit real quick how this looked like. So this is just like a plain page. It has a route with a username. It has a form so that you can introduce and send your username to the server. And then if we found a user, we just show it. So the only important piece here that I want you to remember is that we have an ID here for the user login, and we'll come back later there to see why it's important. So in our page model, we just get in a GitHub client, which is something that we have built. And this is using HTTP client, which Ryan, I think, talked about in the past here.
Yep.
The HTTP client factory?
Yes, the HTTP client factory. So this is very Razor-like or very idiomatic. We define an input model. We have a username. We have our input property, and we say that this needs to be bound. We have our client property, and we have our GitHub user. So on our GET request, if we don't have a username, if we have a username, we go and fetch it. If we don't, we just like render the page. And on post, we essentially grab the username from the input and redirect to the page. So the last part I want to show you is a startup. So a startup just has the default ASP.NET standard stuff. And then we are just like adding the client, setting the base address, and setting the user agent. So essentially, if we were to write a functional test for this right now, our functional test would be something like, go and get this page, send this form to the server, and in the response back, I want to see a username. Okay, I want to see the details for the username. I want to see the login. I want to see the company, etc., etc.
Right. So this is more of a functional test scenario where you really do need to kind of test how it's working based on input and state.
Yes, exactly. So for those type of tests, we ideally don't want to be hitting the GitHub API. We want to replace those services with some sort of mock that allows us to still test our app end to end, but don't have to deal with their external dependencies.
Avoid some flakiness.
Yes.
No flaky tests.
Avoid flakiness and about user-specific, environment-specific constraints.
Well, and there are other things like the GitHub API has rate limits and things like that. Right?
Exactly. So I'm going to show you something that I've built to show you how you can do these three things. Go and like get the page, grab the HTML, send a form based on that HTML, and then get a new page back and be able to query things on that page.
Ooh.
So what I've done is I've created a couple of helper methods that I just copied straight from whatever I have in Identity for doing functional tests. And what we're doing is we're using a library called AngleSharp to parse the HTML and kind of like get an understanding of the.
So those are just in the public repo, right? Like someone wanted to go grab that code as well and do exactly what you're doing. Is it in the identity repo? Is that where that code is? Yeah,
exactly.
So open source. It's the beauty of open source. Feel free to.
Yeah, so I was going to ask about that. For this sample, if people want to see this, they should go look in the identity repo, or is it possible for you to share this specific sample?
So I can share this specific sample. It's on my GitHub account.
Great. Okay.
And I can also point. I was planning to show you guys a tour around how we tested the entire identity UI with this thing and a bit more. And a couple of other patterns that we built on top, so that you can get an idea of like the type of things that you can build yourself with this thing without writing that much infrastructure code, essentially.
Okay. And while I'm interrupting you with questions, we did have a question in the chat, which is how what you're showing us compares to Microsoft ASP.NET Core Test Host. So
that's a great question. What we do is we build on top of the test host. So essentially, we're still using an in-memory host, but we add a lot of things that make it easier for you to test ASP.NET apps. For example, we set the content root of your application to the right path when you are running tests. We also copy the devs file, which is a file that the .NET framework that .NET Core utilizes to figure out the dependencies automatically for you. And we essentially take care of anything that you need to run an app, an MVC app in memory on top of test host. On top of that, we also give you a bunch of niceties. So for example, with test host, you can just create an HTTP client or create a handler. With the web application factory, you can automatically do cookies, you can do the redirects, which are things that are not trivial to do by yourself. We have tests in some of our repos that use test host directly and are way more complicated and way more verbose and way more error prone to write than with this thing, because we do things like parse your cookie and like grab a value from the cookie and pass it back on the next request, all by hand. And those type of things are things that are very low level. That is super easy, and I know for experience this, it's super easy to make a mistake on one of those things. And then you are like, Why is my test not working? So we kind of try to like abstract you from all those details so that you don't have to deal with them.
Yeah. Like I think the test host, the goal of the test host mainly is to wire up the HTTP stuff in HTTP client to the HTTP stuff in the ASP.NET Core middleware pipeline, like to get those two things to wed together so you can exercise the pipeline entirely. And it's a very well-factored piece of code that does that. Web Application Factory, however, is more like a batteries included model where it's like this does all the things that you really need when you go to test an app, like all the app model concerns, like the content root, like runtime compilation, all these types of things are just set up to work. So it's test host plus. It's the thing that just does all the stuff that you're probably going to want to do anyway on top of test host so that you can write functional tests.
Yeah, great. That's a great way to put it. Okay, so I'm going to gloss over the details of the helpers that I have here, but I essentially have one that creates a document, and I think it's like 45 lines complete. And then I have another one here that allows you to send HTTP requests based on a form element and a button. So if I go and show you my test, this is my, can I get a GitHub user? So what I'm doing here is I'm going to create a method. In this case, I'm using a local function to just essentially say, hey, on the service collection, I want to add a singleton that is a GitHub client, and I want to use this test GitHub client, okay?
That is the mock, right? That's the stubbing out of the client.
Yeah, and this is just stubbing up the client. Okay.
So you went into the web application builder for the app, and you kind of tweaked it to change one of the services.
Yes, but we'll get there.
Okay, sorry.
So that's one of the things that we are doing here. We are customizing your app after we've built it. So what happens is you give us your program, we find that create web host builder method, we call it, and then in the context of testing, we allow you to call more methods on that builder so that you can customize your app for testing without having to go and explicitly make the source code in your app test friendly. So in this case, what we are doing is we're calling this with web host builder that will give you the web host builder and will create a custom factory or a custom instantiation of your app with the customizations that you have added. So in this case, we are just calling this configure test services method that will essentially allow you to override services that you have in your app.
The configure test services and configure test services is the first. Am I right that the first one is the method?
Yeah, sorry, I should not have named them the same, but like
is the configure test services on web host builder? Is that
this is an extension method that we created? So this lives in.
Is that part of the testing?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So okay. This lives in configure test services.
And how is that one different than just like configure services?
This has some magic that allows you to register services after your startup code has run.
Oh, okay.
That's the magic. So for example, if you need to reconfigure options are really hard to reconfigure because like if you have an option here and then you have an option here, and this is the one in your startup, no matter what you said in the option here, even that this one in your startup is registered after it, it's always going to override the one that you put in your test. But if instead you move the setup from your test after the registration in the startup,
okay,
then you can override settings. So we have a bit of plumbing to make that easy in the common case.
Very interesting. Cool.
For cases where like this falls short, the recommendation is that you change your startup so that you can do these things yourself. So after we customize our web host builder, we just create a new client. And then we just use the helper methods that we created before to just say, hey, go and get the GitHub page, make sure it's okay, then go and get the document from the response, and this will give us an HTML document. Then we say something like, I want you to send a post request for this user profile form. And then we are going to be passing in the inputs, and the input is this user. So the same way we put before danroth27, now we are doing user.
And that query selector, that's coming from Angle Sharp, right?
Yeah, that's coming from Angle Sharp. That's why I was mentioning that, like, well, we don't give you like something specific to test HTML. It's relatively easy to build it yourself without that much code. But the nice thing about doing it this way is that you don't have to worry about anti-forgery. Like, this thing is taking care of like grabbing the inputs and like the cookies being handled by the HTTP client. So those are the type of things that will get in your way, and we try to smooth those things as much as possible. So in this case, what's going to be happening is that we are going to post this form, and then that form is going to redirect to the login page, and then we are going to get, sorry, not to a login page, to the GitHub user page with a specific username, and then we are going to get the page. So given that we are using the default client, it's following those redirects automatically. So you can think of it as follows. You introduce your username on the page, you hit the button, and then you get the new page with the additional information. And that is what is happening here. We get the page, we send the form with the information, and we get the new page with the additional information. So in this case, when we get the response back, we just, again, parse the document, and then we say, hey, can you give me the user login element? And this is, if you remember before when I showed the sample, the ID that I was mentioning that was specific to the user log, that was the container for the user login. So the idea is that while you are building your app and you are testing, you should like find some way of identifying these things. It can be as simple as an ID, but you can find other schemes, and it's really up to you how you want to choose to do this.
That send async method is pretty fancy. So that send async is not the normal HTTP client send async. That's the one that's actually calling into your helper to do an actual form post based off of that HTML form element, right?
Yes.
The line 91 there.
Yes. So
that's pretty cool.
So this is this, and like it's not hard to build. Like this is dealing with pretty much everything, and it's just like this is just using a bit of Angle Sharp to say, go and find me the form. I really don't want to go into the details of that.
Yeah, no, but it's not that much code.
It's a bit of Angle Sharp to say, give me this form, put it on an HTTP on a form content, and like send it.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, and we can run this test to show you that I'm not lying. So we're gonna go to Test Explorer here, which is nice, even though it's not as nice as the other one. I really like the other one.
I thought they did a bunch of Test Explorer improvements.
Yeah,
15.7 is a lot better.
Yeah, but the other one is built by the community.
That's true.
Like that for me has extra value.
Built by the community, for the community.
Exactly. So we are.
While you're doing this, I've got a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to see the test finish running or you want the questions now.
I can go with the questions.
Okay, so Luke asks if you can clarify the difference between integration testing and functional testing.
Oh, I don't know. That's why I use them interchangeably. Javier probably has a more principled description, though. I'm a PM. I can be loose with my verbiage.
So honestly, I usually call these tests functional tests. They are really, if you want to be technical, integration tests. The way to think of it is as a pyramid. So you have unit tests that test the functionality in your component in isolation. Okay, you're testing a method, you're testing a property, you are testing just one thing. Then integration tests are things that range between like testing how two components work together to testing pretty much everything. The main difference that I make between integration tests and functional tests is that for me, functional tests imply, if we want to be strict, imply that you deploy the thing to the server and you test it with whatever clients is gonna be talking to. Those are also called sometimes end-to-end tests, but in general, for me, I'm okay with calling this type of in-memory test functional test, because you're essentially executing the entire pipeline except for like the network and like your dependencies.
Okay. I got one more question.
Yeah.
Or go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I've got one more question here. This is there some sort of simplification for OAuth or OIDC authentication testing?
So for authentication testing, I haven't shown it here, but one thing that you can do is when you are testing authentication, you are typically not testing authentication, you are testing authorization. And what you want to know essentially is if I have an ID of some sort of, if I have an ID, a user like with and I have an action with like these attributes or these requirements or these roles, will I be able to hit this endpoint? That's kind of what you want to know. So one thing that you can do is you can build your own testing middleware, your own testing authentication middleware, and you can do something like, when I send a request with this header, then authenticate me with this ID, with this principle, and that way, from that point on, the rest of your pipeline works that way. For doing something specific with OIDC or OAuth, I would need more information essentially to understand what you're trying to accomplish. But I would say that if you need to go out to the network, it's gonna be hard to build it this way.
Right.
Like acquiring the token from like if you're using some other OpenID Connect provider, and you want to actually acquire a real token from that thing, that's like we saw with the GitHub client, that's probably not something you'd want to do in a test run necessarily. So you'd have to stub that part out, but then you'd also have to stub out the part where it actually validates the token and says like, yes, this token is okay.
Exactly. And what I was mentioning is, well, what you can do in the context of a test is, instead of validating the token and doing things like that, you just change the authentication middleware to say, here is my test authentication, and it can have a scheme that is as simple as like, I will always authenticate you with this user or something like that.
I do think would be interesting for this infrastructure is like if you are like building an OpenID Connect provider, like the identity server guys or OpenID Dict or something like that, all the endpoints that they have, I'm sure they would love to be able to exercise all the OpenID Connect flows with that server. And this infrastructure, I would think, would be ideal for testing the UI, testing the app management, all those types of functionality. Very similar scenario to what we do with our own identity UI.
Yeah, actually, let me show that real quick, because I think it's interesting.
We're in the Matrix. Oh,
yes, exactly. No, it's Inception.
Inception. Sorry, yes, that's even better. I don't know. Okay. If you go more than 3 levels deep, then you're like.
So, wow, you still remember that.
Have to go deeper.
Yes. So let me get here to the functional test in identity. And what I'm going to show you is something that I built on top of this testing infrastructure just to be able to test identity. So when building tests for the UI, you typically want to do a couple of things. You want to reuse as much code as possible, and there will be a lot of overlapping between whatever your like different tests do. So you kind of want to structure the code in a different way. So what I did was, for each page that I have in the identity UI, for each Razor page, I created an equivalent test page. Okay, so I have a bunch of infrastructure code that I'm not gonna go into, but the idea is that for each page that you have in your app, you create a test page that is the logical view of that Razor page, and you have there things like, there you have the things that you care about, like, for example, what actions you can do. So that is a nice way to essentially abstract the important things on the page. For example, I want to click this login button, or I want to send this form type of thing. So, for example, a very simple page is this index test page that I have here, and it just gets an HTTP client, and it can get an index document, and and a context class that I'm not gonna get into. But essentially, we have methods like, oh, I have an HTTP client. I want to navigate to the index page. Go and create the index page. So that simply is like, go and get the page and just go and parse it as an HTML page.
So these things aren't pages in the sense like a Razor page. Like this isn't actually rendering any HTML. It's just like a page test helper. It's got like all the methods that you would want to use to test that particular page. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe it's clear if I show a test. So for example, if I show the management test, like if I want to write a test for like, hey, can I enable two-factor auth in my app through the UI? I essentially have what I call user stories, which are the flows that you follow in your app, or the journey that you follow in your app to accomplish something, like, for example, registering a user and things like that.
So those would be things that like spam multiple pages potentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for example, for like registering a user is I go to the login page, I click the register link, and then I send the register form to the page, and then I get back to the index page, for example. So those are things that I capture in this thing that I call user stories, and we can like probably see one of them. So let's see this one, for example. So essentially, I create a username and a password, and I say, hey, go and create an index page, go and click the register link, go and submit this form. Okay, that's kind of my task. So what I'm trying to show you with this is essentially how you can like structure your code to test your app by essentially abstracting the logic of the details of like the HTML and like how you click things and how you send forms into this test pages concept. Then on top of that, you can essentially create the flows that you follow through your app. So for example, go to the index page, click the register link, send the register form, create those flows, and then on top, your tests are just go and execute this flow and make sure that everything works. The nice thing is that, for example, if you need to do something more complicated, like enabling two-factor auth in this case, you can reuse all the code that you use for when you were testing the registration, and then say, now I want to do this extra step or this extra thing, and you reuse all that code. I do get that this is a bit abstract and a bit kind of like too much to maybe to grasp at once. I just want to like give you kind of an overview of what we've done in Identity UI, because I think it's complex enough that it will suit that it will show that like you can test a real thing with this. And for more details, you can go to the functional test project and just take a look in depth yourself if you're interested.
Well, this is great to see the kind of progression from here's a very simple hello world thing that you started with up through more complicated, and then here's a like real world, this is how you're testing complicated scenarios in the identity library. And so this is scaling all the way up to that.
Yeah. And as I said, like I don't have a lot of coding here. This is pretty much everything that I have to test my app. One last thing that I want to show you guys is we were calling this create web host builder method, but you can also just extend web application factory. And maybe I need to like up my font a bit. You can just extend web application factory, and we have a bunch of methods that allow you to configure extra things in there. So you can like configure the web host builder for your app, and you can configure the client and things like that. So for example, in this case, I'm setting up the clients that I create with create client to just not follow redirects, because I was interested in general in following the entire flow. But yeah, I think with this is all I have to show you guys.
Can you to wrap up? Can you you said that the code that you showed earlier is on your GitHub?
Yes.
I think that'd be great too for people to.
Yes, let me.
Javier CN.
Yes, and then is testing demos. Yeah. So I'm gonna see if I can share this through the.
If you can't, I can.
Also post a link, I'm sure, afterwards.
Yeah. So the trick is if you share it in the chat here. So let me grab it. So.
Okay, it's here. Oh no, Inception. Where is the chat here?
It may block you from sending it, and also there's a weird thing in the chat where you have to hit. I hit a dot afterwards, and it seems to work. I've shared it in the chat there.
Okay, awesome.
Cool. All right, this is great. So thank you very much. I think this is really useful to see kind of, like I said, that whole progression of like easy enough to get started and then kind of built. And this is based on what you've been using in the team. So it's something it's new in the product, but it's something that this is kind of an abstraction of the testing infrastructure you've been using for a while, correct?
Yeah. So yeah, we have kind of like battle tested this a bit, if you want to like call it that way. We just like essentially what we did is we grabbed what we had and we cleaned it up. We provided a nice API and we did a bunch of work to make things more magical, so that you didn't have to do a bunch of setup that you had to do in the past manually, which was pretty much impossible to do if you didn't know all the details about the framework. I remember I wrote a blog post for the Asp Net blog about this for 2.0, and it was
somewhat involved.
It was very involved.
Yeah, if you want to do this on 2.0, there is a blog post out there on how to set it up manually, but it's a lot.
Now, if you want to do this in 2.0, what you need to do is update to 2.1.
Update to 2.1 would be better.
That's the way to think about it.
Very cool. All right,
awesome.
Well, that's a good place to wrap up. I think the one remaining important thing is to do the dramatic zoom out.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Dan, I'll let you do it.
Is it the right button or the left button?
It's this one, I think. Okay, I'm ready when you are.
Okay, you should zoom in first a little bit, if that's okay. There, yes, or just lean in. Both is good. Okay, you ready for the dramatic zoom out?
This is, and I'm so ready.
Okay, here we go.
Dramatic zoom out.
It's not working.
Push the 2.
Oh, the what? 2?
I think.
Okay. Again.
Yes. Dramatic zoom out. It's not happening.
No.
Did you test this? Okay.
Okay, we had problems all the time.
Okay. So you just lean back. Okay, that's what we'll do. Dramatic zoom out.
We're gonna get.
It's not zooming. There it's zooming.
Oh, it's happening.
Dramatic. Woo! That was awesome.
Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you guys. Thanks a bunch.